Hello and welcome to Unacademy. Today we are live to cover one of the biggest breaking developments. Just a few hours ago, United States along with Israel have carried out massive strikes against Iran. Multiple explosions have been reported across Iranian cities, particularly in Tehran. Initial reports indicate that the target was primarily the Ayatollah Al Khamenei's residence and his office complex has been primarily targeted, which is a clear sign that the United States and Israel probably are trying to aim at the regime in Iran itself. So, in this live session, there are some important details to discuss, important analysis to cover. See, I will not waste your time just by going into the details of the attack. That is what most other educators and influencers have been doing. That is no way relevant for our exams. Moreover, it would be very speculative as the actual details are still clouded in the shadows of war. So let's discuss purely based on facts, based on what we really know, understand as to why this war has broken out. What does it mean for the region? What could be the implications for India? So the strikes which began a few hours ago, today afternoon, it has been codenamed as Operation Roaring Lion by Israel. This is a clear reference to the lion symbol of the previous Iranian monarchy. The then Shah's regime, which was essentially a puppet regime of the United States, which was installed through a CIA covert operation in 1951-52. If you look at the symbolism attached with the Iranian monarchy and the son of the exiled Shah who remains in the United States today, who's looking to make a comeback. So the symbol of lion is attached with the Shah's family and the empire of Iran of that era. So Israel is clearly making a reference towards regime change. In fact, last year in 2025, when the 12-day war took place between Israel and Iran, and US also joined in bombing the nuclear sites in Iran, that Israeli operation was codenamed Operation Rising Lion, which again was a similar reference. So the intent is quite clear that it is to take aim at not just the nuclear program of Iran, but primarily to push for regime change in Iran. So, what led to this eventual conflict? Because these developments have been building up, the tensions were essentially building up over the last few weeks. So, a month ago in January, Iran witnessed massive protests after the economic pressure because of the sanctions was felt by the common people, the traders, across Iranian bazaars and markets. We saw the eruption of anger and resentment. Very quickly, the youth and the masses joined in, leading to large scale protests, one of the largest that Iran has seen probably since the 1979 revolution. So, as expected, Iran crushed these protests brutally with massive force. According to reports, Iran ended up slaughtering thousands of innocent civilians. The numbers are as high as even 15 to 20,000. So back then, the United States issued an open warning to Iran, stating that US would not hesitate to intervene to back the protesters in order to topple the regime. But however, things are not as simple as they appear to be. Don't assume for even a second that US or Israel are coming to the assistance and genuine help of the Iranian people. They have a different ulterior motive, which we are going to discuss today. So, since the protests that broke out last month, the US started a very large scale military mobilization, which all of us have been tracking over the last 5 to 6 weeks. See, United States, it operates multiple military bases in West Asia and in the region around Iran. It has a very important military base in Jordan, where multiple frontline fighter jets are stationed. It has a key military base in the United Arab Emirates and as well as in Saudi Arabia. It has a key naval base in Bahrain, which serves as the command center of the 5th Naval Fleet and the US CENTCOM. In Qatar, the US operates another important military base with frontline fighters and missile defense systems. So, across the region, from Turkey to Iraq to Jordan to Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, and Bahrain, across these countries, the US has multiple military bases in the region. And in the last few weeks, it carried out a huge forward deployment, bringing in thousands of additional troops, including special forces. and all the frontline key assets of the US armed forces have been pushed into the region. This included the two major carrier battle groups, one led by USS Abraham Lincoln, which arrived near the Gulf of Oman, very close to the strategic Strait of Hormuz. And USS Abraham Lincoln is one of the largest and one of the most advanced aircraft carriers, which comprises of an entire carrier battle group, including destroyers, stealth frigates, and submarines. Then, parallelly, the US started mobilizing the Gerald Ford, the world's largest aircraft carrier, and the entire battle group was mobilized from the Caribbean region, where it was stationed off Venezuela during the recent action against Venezuela, and it was diverted from there towards the Mediterranean. However, the entry of Gerald Ford took some time as the world's largest aircraft carrier was hilariously facing a plumbing issue, leading to a huge crisis where thousands of sailors were struggling to use the toilets. So this led to some delays, and eventually Gerald Ford arrived in the Mediterranean and the Red Sea region just a few days ago. Apart from that, the US was pushing advanced fighter jets from F 35s to F 22 Raptors to the F 16s and F 18s. There was a massive mobilization of the tanker aircraft, which is critical for refueling, along with forward deployment of missile batteries and air defense systems. The US has even brought in its latest suicide drone squad, which is named Task Force Scorpion, along with electronic warfare measures. So, this mobilization was a clear signal that the US was planning something big. It was just a matter of time before US could launch this large scale operation. And if you ask me, I don't think this is a one off strike. I don't think this is going to end in a day or two. This has been designed from the beginning to last days and weeks together until the regime probably surrenders or topples or the regime is entirely eliminated. So, this raises the prospect or the unimaginable specter of a full blown out regional war. See, some of you might think this is nothing different because we have been accustomed to such clashes in the recent years. In a way, we have all been desensitized to conflict, right? And that again shows the chaotic world that we live in. Some might raise the specter of a World War III, but that might be a little far fetched. But today's wars and conflicts, they have a very different dimension attached to it. They may not be all consuming as it was during the earlier part of 20th century. Right? Today, maybe we're already living in the midst of a global conflict in a very chaotic period where you will witness such regular, recurring conflicts very periodically. So, if you look at the kind of mobilization US has carried out and the kind of preparation that Israel has been doing, the intent is very clear that this is designed to be a sustained operation which might last days and weeks if required until Iran probably completely topples. Now, what we need to assess here is the true motive, the true intent. As I told you, US President appeared as a messiah for the Iranian people last month when the large scale protests were taking place. Donald Trump issued open threats to the Ayatollah and the Iranian regime and even issued a direct warning that if Iran were to target the peaceful protesters, the innocent protesters, then US would not hesitate to resort to military action in order to protect the protesters. Now, for some of you who might be seeing this from the outside, it might appear that the US genuinely cares about the civilian population. But as I said, there is a larger intent, a larger motive. This is probably a bigger push towards try and utilize this opportunity for themselves to fulfill their own agendas, which is to topple the Iranian regime, which has been the primary threat for US Israeli interests since 1979, since the Iranian Revolution. But again, that said, the Iranian regime is nothing to be proud of. Since 1979, under the Ayatollahs, the radical Shia clerics have turned the country into a conservative setup, targeting civilians, crushing basic rights, targeting women, and crushing gender rights. But again, this is not for outside powers to determine. If at all, the regime has to be toppled, it's up to the people of Iran, right? So, when you say that US and Israel do have an ulterior motive here, doesn't mean we are automatically supporting the Iranian regime either, right? There are no saints in this conflict. All of them have their own agendas here, their own interests which are being fulfilled. So when Donald Trump threatened the Iranian regime last month, It was not out of pure, genuine interest for the Iranian people. It was more about satisfying Israeli interests and American interests. Now, see, when you look at what Donald Trump has said today, after the clashes began, after the initial assault started, Donald Trump, he posted a video on social media where he has urged Iranian people to get out on the streets, use this opportunity. And he's saying this is a once in a generation opportunity to take back your government. Basically, you're instigating the people of a foreign country to rebel, to trigger a civil war of sorts with external assistance, where there is active military intervention in order to topple the current established authority. Now, such blatant foreign intervention is illegal under international law. Now, we have no sympathy for the Iranian regime. And yes, we can understand the plight of the Iranians who have suffered under the radical theocratic Shia regime of the Ayatollahs. But doesn't mean you can automatically support a blatant foreign intervention and military aggression with no valid reason. US and Israel, they are labeling this as a preemptive action. Both US and Israel are calling it a preemptive military action, but under international law, there is no basis for such preemptive military action. When you look at the UN Charter, Article 2, Clause 4 makes it very clear that the sovereignty of a country can never be violated. It prohibits the use of military force to violate the sovereignty of another country. It even prohibits the threat of force to the political independence and stability of another state. So when US and Israel try to justify this, saying this is a preemptive action because Iran's nuclear program was a threat, Iran was allegedly building intercontinental ballistic missiles, sponsoring proxies against us, none of these reasons can be used as a valid legal excuse under international law. So this again represents a blatant violation of the rules-based order, a complete disregard for the UN Charter and its principles. This is something which has sort of become a normal since 2022, since Russia invaded Ukraine, since China started showing blatant aggression against other countries in the Indo-Pacific, violating their territorial sovereignty, and since US under President Trump started disregarding the sovereignty of others, claiming Greenland, intervening in Venezuela, threatening Denmark. So this has become a norm of sorts. And if Israel, if you have seen during the Gaza war, following the deadly terror attack by Hamas, as part of the Gaza war, Israel has violated the sovereignty of at least 6 countries in the last 3 years with absolutely no consequences. Israel has launched attacks on Yemen, on Qatar, on Lebanon, and Syria, and as well as on Palestinian territories. So all the big powers, from Russia to China, US to Israel, they have blatantly resorted to hegemonic practices, a sort of reminder of the colonial era imperialist policies where big powers would do what they want with no regard for the interests of the others. So, this indeed raises serious concerns because preemptive actions are not really justified under UN principles. Some of you might say that UN does provide an exemption under Article 51. Countries can use military force. But however, this exemption is specific only for self defense. There is a world of difference between self defense and preemptive strikes. Self defense is when you're already under armed attack. If, let's say, one country has already attacked you, then you have the right to self defense. Like Iran now can claim the right to self defense since US Israel have launched the initial strike. They were the primary aggressors. Iran can claim this exemption under self defense and retaliate. But using the excuse of preemptive strikes based on intelligence assessments, based on projected threats in the future, you can't violate the sovereignty of other countries and incite people of another country to rebel and take down the governments. So, such blatant foreign intervention goes against international principles. And again, I repeat my point. See, we are not favoring the Iranian regime. The Ayatollah's regime has been the biggest disaster for Iran and its people. There's no doubt about it. But it doesn't give any right for foreign powers like US and Israel to intervene either. As I said, this is not about Iranian people, it's not about democracy. They're not even looking to install democracy this time. They are quite openly pushing for the return of monarchy, the return of the Shah, the son of the then Shah, who's now sheltered in the US, is quite eager to come back And US has been quietly and quite publicly as well pushing the return of monarchy in Iran. So this would be a backstep for Iran. So if this is not about the people of Iran, it's not about the rights of the people of Iran, and if the action is not entirely legal, then what's the real intent here? US and Israel are saying that Iran's nuclear program represents an existential threat. Now, when you look at the Iranian regime since 1979, since the Ayatollahs, the radical Shia clerics, they toppled the Shah's regime, which was a puppet regime of the US and assumed totalitarian control, they have called for death to America and death to Israel. Iran's primary goal in the region has been to not just oppose US Israeli hegemony, but to counter them, decimate them. And Iran has been trying to even wipe out Israel as well. So, obviously, both are arch rivals. Israel has similar intentions about Iran. Israel wants to wipe out the Iranian regime, and they have been waiting for such opportunities to arise. So, as I said, there are no saints in this complicated conflict in West Asia. West Asia is already a very complex region, and the current developments adds further dimensions to this complexity. Now, Iran, which has been a threat for US and Israeli interests, started pursuing a covert nuclear program somewhere around the 1990s. This nuclear program did get exposed in the early 2000s when some of the Iranian nuclear scientists defected to the West and revealed the scope and nature of the nuclear weapons program. Iran believed that building a nuclear arsenal would be the only deterrent against Israel and United States because it's widely believed that Israel possesses nuclear weapons. Israel maintains that ambiguity deliberately. Just like India, Pakistan, Israel has also not signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty. And according to reports, Israel has developed its nuclear weapons, tested them through simulations primarily, and it has received even support from the then nuclear weapons program of South Africa, apartheid era South Africa. And Israel has carried out few simulated tests, and according to again reports, it has deployable nuclear assets. So, given that Israel allegedly went nuclear, for Iran, this was about survival and creating a deterrence. So, as Iran pursued an illegal covert nuclear program, despite being a signatory to NPT, because under the Shah, Iran had signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Iran still remains a signatory to NPT. Under NPT, once you sign it, you can't develop nuclear weapons. It only recognizes the P5 countries as official nuclear weapon states. That is US, Russia, China, UK, and France. Only these five nuclear powers are allowed to maintain their arsenal and even develop their arsenal. So, Iran, when it pursued a covert nuclear program, it became a direct threat and an immediate concern for US and Israel. And over the decades, over the last 2 decades, both US and Israel have made multiple attempts to derail Iran's nuclear program. First, they started with a series of covert assassinations led by the CIA of the United States and Mossad of Israel, where top Iranian nuclear scientists and generals, they were quite openly assassinated in Iran and as well as across the world. Then they even resorted to covert cyber warfare. In 2007-2008 period, US and Israel developed one of the most sophisticated malware, a computer worm known as Stuxnet, which was used to penetrate into the computer systems that controlled Iran's nuclear centrifuges. And they gained remote access to the control systems, spun the centrifuges out of control, physically destroying some of the nuclear centrifuges in Iran. So, apart from such covert assassinations and cyber warfare campaigns, Israel has even tried carrying out strikes at some of the nuclear facilities that are spread out, not just in Iran, but as well as in neighboring Syria. Israel has carried out such strikes in the past. So, as Iran went ahead and accelerated the program, US targeted Iran with economic coercion through economic sanctions that were levied starting from 2006-2007 period. These sanctions lasted until 2014. By then, the sanctions had a crippling effect. It had crushed the Iranian economy. Even India had been brought under a lot of pressure back then. But the then Manmohan Singh government largely evaded the American sanctions, as we don't follow unilateral sanctions generally because of our strategic autonomy and independent foreign policy. India had continued buying oil from Iran, investing in Chabahar port, because Iran was a very strategically important partner for India as well. Right? So India had taken a great risk to go against American sanctions and continue the close partnership with Iran. Iran was critical for energy security, to counter Pakistan, to counter terrorism, to connect with Central Asia as well. So eventually, in 2014, the tensions that had built up between US Iran, it was toned down through the Iran nuclear deal that was signed, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the JCPOA. It was negotiated by the P5 plus 1 countries with Iran along with European Union. These were the signatories to the JCPOA. The P5 are nothing but the 5 permanent members of Security Council, right? US, Russia, China, UK, and France. Plus 1 refers to Germany, which was a key negotiator, along with Iran and the European Union. Now, as per the deal, listen to me carefully, because this exposes the hypocrisy of the United States. As per the Iranian nuclear deal, Iran had agreed and committed to end its nuclear enrichment, to ensure that it doesn't mass produce weapons grade uranium, which is 90% enriched uranium. And Iran has never reached that stage, by the way. This has been independently verified by the IAEA, International Atomic Energy Agency. So, under the deal, Iran committed to stop all the enrichment work, and it had built up a stockpile of enriched uranium, which it agreed to hand it over to the European partners of the agreement. That is France and Germany. They would take Iran's nuclear stockpile, whatever enriched uranium they had developed through the centrifuges, and in return, they would assist Iran in civilian nuclear technology. And US committed to lift the sanctions, and thus the JCPOA was a lifesaver. It prevented a war back in 2014. Now, when you sign an agreement, the basic expectation is that all the parties stay committed to it. So, under the deal, Iran agreed for inspections. It started allowing IAEA inspectors, which is part of the UN system, which reports to UN Security Council and UN General Assembly. The International Atomic Energy Agency kept a watch on Iran's nuclear program, checking whether it was following the restrictions that were laid down by the Iran nuclear deal. According to IAEA and the other signatories of this deal, Iran was following all the terms of the deal until 2018, which means for 4 years, Iran had stopped all its enrichment, right? It had never reached weapons grade enrichment level up to 90%. It was somewhere between 20 to 60% levels. It had accumulated few hundred kilograms, around 300 to 400 kilograms of enriched uranium. Probably it could have been enriched to 90% in few weeks, and maybe in few months it would have had a warhead. Maximum, Iran would have built up maybe 4 to 5 warheads if it had continued, right? But however, because of the deal, everything came to a halt. Iran stopped the enrichment, handed over the stockpile, and European partners were ensuring that Iran doesn't violate the deal. And they were helping Iran only in civilian nuclear technology, for power generation, for medical purposes, etc. Then all of a sudden comes Donald Trump, Trump's first presidency. Trump, who was aligned with Israeli interests to topple Iran's regime, to reinstigate the rivalries and tensions, and use the excuse of a nuclear program to target Iran, started accusing Iran without basis, without evidence, that Iran is violating the terms of the deal. This was not backed by US intelligence assessments. This is something which is available in the public domain. The US intelligence community did not agree with their own president that Iran was violating the terms of the deal. The IAEA refuted the claims of Donald Trump. All the other signatories to the deal, right? They also went against the claims being made by United States in 2018. You might say Russia, China, of course, will support Iran. But even Germany, France, and UK and European Union, right, who are allies of the United States, they did not they did not agree with Trump's assessment that Iran was violating the deal. So without any excuse, Trump quit the deal. Trump loves quitting deals and agreements, right? And you have seen how Trump exits each and every multilateral initiative. So Trump exited this in 2018, brought back crippling sanctions, started crushing the Iranian economy again. So this led Iran to go back to the path of pursuing nuclear enrichment, right? This was an act of rebellion from Iran. That's the period when US started eliminating top Iranian generals. For example, the general of the Quds Force, which is an elite special force unit of the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, was eliminated through a US drone strike, Qasem Soleimani. This was a big blow for Iran, where US was directly targeting Iranian officials and government leaders. Blatant attacks. These were not even covert assassinations. These were public killings which were being executed. So this pushed back Iran on the path of aggression and it went back to nuclear enrichment. So since then, the tensions have been building up. So essentially, the US itself laid the seed for the tensions to rise again. The issue had been sorted, at least for the time being, and the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action had kept things under control. Iran was abiding by the terms of the deal. It had stopped enrichment, which was verified by IAEA and the European partners as well. It had even handed over all the nuclear stockpile. So this tells you everything you need to know about the true intentions of US and Israel over here. Now, of late, that is after Trump came back for the second term, since last year, Donald Trump has been again pressing upon Iran to agree for a new nuclear deal. Now, again, you tell me the logic, the rationale behind this. If there was already a nuclear deal which had worked, and it was Trump who had exited this, and then Iran started violating it, then what's the whole point of going back and negotiating again? But again, rhetoric aside, the Gaza war, of course, had changed all the dynamics, right? Iran has been on the back foot for the last 3 years, ever since Hamas carried out the deadly terror attack against Israel. Israel has gone with all guns blazing. It has targeted Iran's proxies from Hamas to Hezbollah. It had carried out direct strikes on Iran, weakening Iran and pushing Iran on the back foot. So once Trump came back into office, the Trump administration started bringing that pressure back to push Iran again towards nuclear talks. These talks were attempted by the Biden administration as well, but you did not see that kind of coercion or the threat tactics being used. But however, the sanctions remained in place and the talks unfortunately didn't go anywhere under Biden administration, mainly because of the pandemic first, then the Ukraine war, and then the Gaza war. So now with Trump back in office, the spotlight was back on Iran's nuclear program. So either Iran agrees and commits to a new deal or it will face consequences. See, now nobody wants a nuclear Iran. It's neither in India's interest nor in the interest of any other country in the region. Even though India has maintained good ties with Iran, even we don't want a nuclear Iran. That completely alters the balance of power in the region. It could even push the world towards a bigger nuclear arms race. So no country genuinely wants Iran to go down the nuclear path. But again, using coercion, threats, and military pressure is not the way to go. So during the recent talks, it was Oman which was acting as a mediator between US and Iran. So several rounds of talks were held in Muscat last year, but the talks did not really make any big progress. So recently in Geneva, in Switzerland, as Switzerland has a policy of geopolitical neutrality, it offered itself as a neutral location. Geneva is known to host such talks. And Oman, acting as a neutral mediator, was trying to negotiate between US and Iran to work out a nuclear deal. And these talks have been going on for the last few weeks. After multiple rounds of talks, the talks eventually failed. And this is when US was parallelly building up its military mobilization. So that has nothing to do with the Iranian protests. That is just an excuse, saying Trump will come to the rescue of Iranian people. Because parallelly, the nuclear talks were going on. And if Iran doesn't agree to what US wants, then essentially the threat, the military threat was being dangled in front of Iran. So this is classic gunboat diplomacy, which has its roots in colonial imperialism, where the bigger powers, they bully the smaller powers with the threat of military force and coercion. Right? When you deploy naval assets, aircraft carriers, massive military mobilization surrounding the country, holding a gun to their head, you either agree to our terms, and if you don't, you know the consequences. So that was the kind of setup that US had placed in front of Iran. So US had two basic conditions, and I want you to understand this very clearly. At the Geneva talks, the US had two conditions for Iran. One, stop all your nuclear enrichment. A complete halt to all the enrichment activities. Then second, stop the support for all the proxies, that is Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis, who have been targeting Israel and creating more instability, adding to the radicalist extremist threat across the West Asia region. Iran is known to cultivate these covert proxies and uses them as a geopolitical weapon to target Israeli and American interests. So, especially since the Gaza war, since October 7, 2023, Iran has activated all these proxies, using them repeatedly to weaken Israeli American interests in the region. Though Israel has decimated Hamas Hezbollah, weakened the Houthis as well, they still remain active on the ground, and Iran can even try to revive them. So, US had two conditions: stop sponsoring all the proxies, make a commitment, and stop all your nuclear enrichment. So, these were the maximum positions that US was taking with no middle ground, no compromise. So, obviously, Iran rejected all the demands. Iran wanted some level of enrichment to be allowed, not to build weapons, but to focus on its civilian nuclear program and research. The US did not agree to it, as neither side trusts both sides. There is no trust between them, because Iran also has done things in the past which erodes the trust between these parties. There have been instances where Iran has covertly done something else while it has promised something else in the public domain. Right? It has covertly tried activating the program in the past as well, and it has tried taking the path towards a nuclear bomb. So, given that US took a maximalist position and Iran was not agreeing to both the demands, the talks have completely collapsed. At least three rounds of talks were held in Geneva, though the talks remain classified. At least the records available indicates that Iran rejected the demands of the US and it did not agree to stop the enrichment. It didn't even agree to stop backing and sponsoring the proxies. So this was the final nail in the coffin. So ever since the talks collapsed, which was just a couple of days ago, it was highly anticipated that by this weekend, US and Israel are likely to strike Iran, because all the pieces of the chess set of the geopolitical chessboard had been moved into place. The mobilization, the preparation, everything was in place. And now we have seen the war being triggered by US and Israel under Operation Roaring Lion. Now, Donald Trump has made some other controversial claims as well. He has been claiming that Iran is building long range missiles that could strike homeland United States, which means, according to Trump, Iran is trying to build ICBMs, intercontinental ballistic missiles, which can travel 10 to 12,000 kilometers and above. Now, these claims of Donald Trump, they are not based on accurate intelligence assessments. In fact, there is a lot of disquiet within the US security and intelligence community regarding what claims the Trump administration has been making. I mean, this reminds us of what happened back in 2003 under the then President George Bush, how falsified intelligence was generated by the Bush administration, especially his vice president, right, Dick Cheney, then his defense secretary, Ronald Rumsfeld, along with the then British Prime Minister, Tony Blair, where they falsified intelligence, accusing Iraq under Saddam Hussein of developing and possessing WMDs, weapons of mass destruction. This was the justification used by US and UK in 2003 to invade Iraq and topple Saddam Hussein's regime. Eventually, how many WMDs did they find? Zero. Not a single weapon of mass destruction was found. And look at what has happened to Iraq. Yes, Saddam Hussein was a dictator, a brutal, authoritarian, totalitarian ruler. But at least Iraq was a stable country, a thriving economy, and he had kept a check on the radical forces in the region. With the fall of Saddam Hussein's regime and the Ba'athist Party, you saw the rise of sectarianism, the sectarian divide between Shias and Sunnis, and the rise of radical terror groups as well. Believe it or not, the US even worked with branches of Al Qaeda, such as Al Nusra Front, in Iraq and Syria region, when the same country was fighting Al Qaeda in Afghanistan. Look at the hypocrisy of this. Parallelly, US was fighting Al Qaeda in Afghanistan, in Yemen, and across the Arabian Peninsula and Africa. But in the Iraq-Syria belt, they were actually working with Al Qaeda factions such as Al Nusra Front. Why? Because it was serving their interests. It was this political vacuum and the chaos that they had created which gave rise to the Islamic State. A fertile ground had been created for the rise of a new and more radical terror group. And that's how the ISIS rose to prominence, capturing territory in Iraq and Syria and declaring the formation of a caliphate. So US military misadventures rather, it has had disastrous consequences. right? You look back, you go back and look back at all the US military interventions from Korean Peninsula to Vietnam to Afghanistan to all the American military interventions in Middle East, North Africa region, in Latin America as well. Across the world, throughout the last 8 decades, US has left behind a trail of destruction. Now, meddling in Iran, aiming at regime change, and essentially trying to incite the people, this could create long-term instability, which can't be easily fixed. These are irreversible changes that US and Israel are pushing at. You might think I'm taking one side here, but as I said, we are not backing Iranian regime, the Ayatollah's regime. The Ayatollahs have been brutal theological dictators, crushing the Iranian people, crushing their rights. There's no sympathy for them, right? The sympathy lies with the people of Iran, but that does not give right to anyone else to intervene from the outside. If at all a revolution has to come, it will come from within. It has to be organic. But these engineered movements from the outside, with coercive military action and large scale military strikes, things could easily spiral out of control. Because, see, if this war was genuinely about Iran's nuclear program, about preventing Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons, then last year, US Israel, when they carried out these massive strikes on nuclear facilities, both of them claimed that they had decimated Iran's nuclear capabilities. Though later Israel corrected itself and said that Iran could still, revive and build back its nuclear program. Donald Trump was basically blowing the trumpet, claiming that US had decimated and wiped out the nuclear capabilities of Iran. In 2025 June, Israel launched major strikes on Iran's military bases, air defense systems, and as well as the nuclear sites. But Israel alone could not destroy the capabilities because most of the nuclear facilities of Iran, at least the key centrifuges and the assembly facilities, they are located deep underground or under mountainous structures, which means you need really powerful bunker penetrators and massive ordnance penetrator bombs, and which Israel doesn't have. So that's where the US played a big role, where the US joined in the 12-day war, and the American B 2 strategic bombers. They dropped the massive ordnance penetrator, one of the biggest conventional bombs in the world, targeting facilities at Fordo, Natanz, and as well as Tehran and Isfahan, where the major nuclear facilities of Iran are located. Israel had already caused some damage to the military infrastructure, air defense systems, etc. And US almost wiped out some of the nuclear facilities, causing significant damage as claimed by the US itself. So if, according to US, their nuclear capabilities had been decimated, then what was the need to go back to the path of tensions and conflict? Talks would have worked. Of course, one can argue, right? There's another argument that Iran had already taken out some of its key centrifuges and the nuclear raw materials, secured it at different locations in other underground facilities before the Israeli US strike could occur. Of course, Iran could even try and revive and build back everything from scratch. That possibility will always remain. But you can arrest Iran from building nuclear weapons only when you offer a fair deal and only when you stick to the commitments of the deal which has been made. If there was a deal which was working from 2014 to 2018, why did the US quit when there was no valid proof to show that Iran was violating the terms of the deal? So, as I say always in international relations, right, there's no morality as such. You don't really, focus on being guided by values, ethics, principles. It's purely guided by interests, and that more often or less is guided by self-interest of a nation. So, some of you might agree with it or you disagree with it, but that's the hard truth, the hard reality of global geopolitics. So, one thing is very sure, very certain: the true intent of Netanyahu and Trump is to push for regime change, like how US took out Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela. Right? Again, Venezuela had an authoritarian leader who had destroyed the economy, crushed the human rights of the people of Venezuela, but it was not for Donald Trump to intervene. Right? International law doesn't permit such external interventions. So the intent here is 99%, which is to focus on regime change. It's not about helping the people of Iran. It's not about the nuclear program as well. Right? Iran was at least several months to years away from actually building a proper nuclear warhead. Given the last year's strikes, Iran had suffered a big setback. And also in the last 3 years, the kind of decimation Israel has carried out against Iranian proxies, Iran had clearly suffered a big setback. It was on the back foot. There was no way Iran could have built a bomb. And most experts also agree that Iran was several months, if not days, or if not years, away from building a proper nuclear warhead. So there was still scope available for talks, for negotiations to work, but only if the deal was fair and on equitable terms. But now, what can Iran do? Right? What is the next thing that might happen? Of course, Iran will not take this lying down. If if as we believe the intent is to push for regime change, take aim at the Iranian leadership and the ayatollahs themselves, right? Then US Israel are likely to drag this war, continue this. It may not be like last year's 12-day war. It might even extend to decimate and weaken Iran's military leadership, to take aim at IRGC, and as well as the leadership itself, including the elimination or possible kidnapping of Ayatollah, like how Maduro was kidnapped. Because according to reports, the American Special Forces, the same Delta Force units, and the Night Stalkers, right, who specialize in such infiltrations and exfiltration operations, they have been mobilized into Iraq, where US has military bases, which is hardly 300 kilometers away from Tehran, right? So there appears to be a plan afoot to even try and kidnap the leadership if required. And if that fails, the goal appears to be to eliminate the leadership, topple the regime, instigate the people so that they can take control. Eventually, they'll try to bring back the monarchy, because that seems to be the viable path for them. But Iran will not take it lying down. Iran will, I mean, if it comes to that point, if push comes to shove, if it becomes a do or die situation, the regime would go all out. And Iran does have a host of options it can exercise. Though definitely Iran is much weaker today, right? Especially because of the beating it has suffered from Israel in the last 3 years. Iran is clearly on a back foot, but still it has sufficient options to cause significant damage. According to latest reports which were coming in just before we started the session, Iran has already launched a barrage of ballistic missiles and drones aimed at Israel. Israel was on a heightened state of alert in anticipation of the retaliatory strikes. Now, when you look at Iran's arsenal, it does have an entire range of options. It has these medium range ballistic missiles which can cause significant damage across West Asia region. And now Iran will consider any legitimate target of Israel and US to be a valid target, which means all American military bases located in Bahrain, in Qatar, in UAE, in Saudi Arabia, they would be the primary targets for Iran. And Iran would directly take aim at Israel. So, though Israel and US have formidable air defense, though they would be able to intercept most of the ballistic missiles, Iran does have an entire range of options with regard to cruise missiles and drones, the Shahid drones, for example, right? And Iran has enough expertise and capability to quickly mass assemble and produce them and use swarming tactics, which was seen in the last 2 years as well, to overwhelm the air defenses of US and Israel. So, if the war were to escalate, there could be casualties on the Israeli side where civilians would pay the price. And of course, this could result in American casualties as well if military bases are targeted. And Trump just today has admitted that US should be prepared to lose few American lives, as if the lives of soldiers are it's disposable. Now, this is the same president who came to power on the so-called MAGA campaign, Making America Great Again, which included reducing and cutting off American military involvement abroad. This was one of the core campaign promises of Donald Trump. In fact, since 2014-15, when Trump started having presidential ambitions, he kept on saying that he would end all American military involvement, bring back American troops from Afghanistan and across the world. And that's one of the reasons why the United States struck a deal with Taliban in 2020 to quit Afghanistan and pull back the American troops from Afghanistan. So now taking US back to war in a faraway region and getting dragged into a possible multi-year conflict would go against this ideology and the promise that he had made to his core vote bank. So several Americans, including his loyal followers, would not be entirely happy with this new military engagement. But of course, there's an entire Jewish Israeli lobby and a lot of pro-Israeli interests in the US who would be backing such action. Because as I said, for Israel, this is about an opportunity, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to wipe out the Iranian regime. And for Iran, this could be a do or die moment. And in such a situation, Iran would probably go all guns out, exercising all the options it has, from targeting Israel directly to targeting American military bases across the region. And this would mean other countries could get dragged into the conflict, from UAE to Saudi Arabia to Qatar to Bahrain to Turkey. They could be forced into this conflict. And what about the NATO, which Trump has been weakening and almost trying to dismantle it? Would this drag some European participants? Because Britain, France, Germany all have key interests, and would in some way we see a bigger involvement of these powers. Now, apart from the direct military options, Iran has another set of options. It can activate all the remaining proxies it has and the covert networks it has built over the decades. See, don't underestimate Iran. It might be on the back foot. It is much weaker compared to US and Israel. There's no doubt about it. US Israel will dominate this war. But Iran packs a punch. Along with the missile and drone options it has, it does have a host of proxy groups and covert networks it can activate to carry out large scale sabotage and disruption operations across the region. And the biggest concern would be using pressure tactics at the Hormuz Strait, which is a critical choke point that connects the Persian Gulf with Gulf of Oman and the Arabian Sea. Almost 20% of global oil shipments pass through it, and Iran has the capabilities to blockade the Hormuz Strait. Of course, US Navy, which has a formidable presence, can clear out the Hormuz Strait and safeguard the channel, but Iran can always cause damage to the oil shipments passing through, and this is something which worries India deeply. Iran can activate the Houthis in Yemen to block out Bab al Mandeb, which is another strategic choke point connecting Gulf of Aden with the Red Sea, a strategic trade route connecting Europe with the Indian Ocean. So the Houthis have already been very active with regard to Gaza war targeting Israel, and the Houthis can cause further damage across the Red Sea trade route and corridor. Then the Hamas, which has almost been decimated, could still cause trouble for Israel in the region, along with Hezbollah, which is the main proxy for Iran. Hezbollah has suffered huge setbacks, right? Its top leadership has been eliminated by Israel in the last couple of years. So Hezbollah still remains active, and today we have already seen reports that Israel has carried out strikes in southern Lebanon, which is aiming at the sites of Hezbollah where it has considerable rocket and artillery power. So the war will extend into Lebanon. And there are other regional proxies. In Iraq, for example, Iran has funded a faction of Hezbollah called the Kataib Hezbollah. The Kataib Hezbollah, which is one of the factions of the Lebanese Hezbollah, could also deliver significant damage to American military presence in Iraq. US has military bases in Iraq, which would play a role in this conflict. And Iran could use Kataib Hezbollah and its units to carry out strikes in Iraq as well. But for Iran, probably the biggest loss would be the loss of Bashar al Assad's regime in 2024. Bashar al Assad was the biggest ally for Iran and the Shia power bloc. So when Assad was toppled by the Hayat Tahrir al Sham, a former Al Qaeda linked terror group, and now the Syrian government under Ahmad al Shara, the former leader of Hayat Tahrir al Sham, has aligned with US, aligned with Sunni powers like Saudi Arabia, aligned with Turkey. So this has been a huge loss for Iran. It loses a key ally, which could have helped in such situations to arm some of these proxy groups from Hezbollah to Hamas. So definitely Iran is on the back foot, but it does have a host of options it can exercise. From direct attacks on Israel and American military bases, it can even strike the other powers, the Sunni powers in the region, to instigate them and drag them into the conflict. It can blockade the Hormuz Strait, use various proxies and covert networks for sabotage operations and disruptions across the region. So such a conflict can't be contained easily. And it comes at the worst possible time. Because at the same time, parallelly, in the same region, Pakistan, Afghanistan are going into an all out open war. Pakistan has been targeting the Afghan Taliban, with Afghan Taliban retaliating, and this could simply spill out of control, right? And you also have the close allies of Iran, Russia and China. They are unlikely to allow the fall of the Iranian regime, which has been their closest ally. They've already realized the huge mistake they made in not backing Assad's regime, where they did very little to support Assad in the last days. And they already lost a key asset in the region. So, Russia, China, if they pull their entire weight and if they start backing Iran, maybe through arms support, through intelligence support, through supply of essential military hardware, there is a possibility that the war could continue to drag. Or worst case, right, the unimaginable scenario, would Russia China step in directly? That is something which you should keep in mind as well. Though it is highly unlikely that Russia China would directly get dragged into the conflict, there is always that possibility which might exist. Because in today's world, right, nothing is off limits, right? We have seen all the unimaginable scenarios. So this is something which could further aggravate things. Of course, Russia is largely preoccupied in Ukraine, and it's suffering a big shortage of troops and weapons on its own. It depended on Iran's Shahid drones as well. But however, China remains a formidable partner. China has huge investments in the Belt and Road Initiative, right? And China relies on Iran as a key ally to secure its influence in the region. So, according to reports, China was about to work out an arms arrangement to supply advanced missiles and air defense systems. But by then, the war has broken out. So, it would be interesting to watch what role China would play going forward. Now, coming to my last point before we end this session, what does this all mean for India? Forget everything else. Eventually, what does it mean for India's interests? See, West Asia is extremely critical for India, and I can't stress upon this. For our energy security, the region is absolutely critical. The Indian economy is almost entirely dependent on it, with 65% of our total crude imports coming from this region. India imports huge quantities of natural gas along with crude oil. So our energy security is directly tied to the supply routes and the stability in this region. Any blockade at Hormuz and Bab al Mandeb can have serious implications for India's energy security and trade. A large part of India's trade headed towards Africa and Europe passes through Bab al Mandeb and the Red Sea route. So, destabilization across these two choke points will have a severe economic effect, a shock on the Indian economy. Apart from that, we have a huge Indian diaspora spread out across the region, more than 10 million in size across the Gulf region alone. In UAE itself, we have 3.5 to 4 million Indians. Qatar has a huge Indian community. Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, across the region, we have a very, very large Indian community. And any further escalation of the conflict could bring Indians in the line of fire, risking their safety, their well being, and creating this unimaginable scenario where India may have to evacuate large number of Indians from across countries. Though India has enough expertise in large scale evacuations, this is going to be a nightmare, right? We have Indian community in Israel as well, close to 37,000 Indian workers. Some Indians in Iran, most of them were pulled out last year, especially Indian students. But you still have a small Indian community in Iran and very large Indian community across the Gulf countries. So if the war escalates, if Iran were to strike American military bases in West Asian countries, and if they also get dragged into the war, then what does it mean for the region? What does it mean for safety of the Indian community? Right? Apart from this, the investments of India in the Chabahar port. See, India has already been under tremendous pressure to follow American sanctions. Back in 2018, India fell under American pressure and the Modi government zeroed out oil imports from Iran. But however, we had obtained an exemption for the investments in Chabahar port. And now these exemptions also have come to an end. And if you look at the current budget, the recent budget, India has provided zero allocation for Chabahar port. India-Iran ties have been affected since 2018 as India fell under American pressure, accepting the sanctions and zeroing out oil imports. So Iran has been unhappy with India for the last 6 to 7 years. Though we have tried repairing the relationship, though we had maintained the balance for many decades, there has been a clear tilt, which is pro US, slightly pro Israel, which is not appreciated by Iran, and the ties have indeed taken a hit. So, this directly affects our access to Afghanistan and access to Central Asia, something which India was trying to build up for the last 2 decades. So, everything could be gone in one single blow. The IMEC, which was proposed at the G20, is already a forgotten story. With these developments, India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor is unimaginable. Ever since the Hamas attack of October 7th and the start of the Gaza war and these tensions, IMEC has almost been ruled out as a possibility. It's unrealistic to even think of it unless and until normalcy comes back. So these are going to be direct implications for India. So for India, the Balancing Act will continue. Since 1947, we have been walking this diplomatic tightrope, balancing Israel on one side, the support for Palestine on one side, the support for Shia powers led by Iran on one side, and support for Sunni powers led by Saudi and UAE on the other side. So this has been a difficult task for India. The challenges will increase even further. But it appears that India is showing a slight shift in its policy in recent times. Just few days back, before this war broke out today, PM Modi was in Israel. Important deals were signed, but more importantly, more important than those agreements, India signaled a great deal of strategic backing for Israel's policies and actions in the region. Now, previously, you often wouldn't find such Indian statements being made, though still India remains committed to the two-state solution. Though we express concern about the state of Palestinians, in the past 3 years, we have expressed concern about disproportionate use of force by Israel, but we have not condemned Israel with regard to the allegations of genocide or war crimes. But we did criticize Israel by signing a statement just a few days back with regard to illegal Jewish settlements. Israel has introduced legal changes to encourage illegal Jewish settlers to occupy more Palestinian land in West Bank. So India has joined one of the statements signed by more than 100 countries, and we refer to Palestinian territories and Golan Heights in Syria as Israeli occupied territories or illegally occupied territories. This is in accordance with the international law, and that's the UN position as well, that Israel is in illegal occupation of Palestinian territories and Golan Heights. So that remains India's position. But however, our close strategic defense partnership has been growing. Our alignment with Israel has been growing. And it's not just India, Israel. Even within the Sunni world, a big split has occurred where UAE, since 2020, since the Abraham Accords were signed, has started closely aligning with Israeli and American interests, creating a split with Saudi Arabia. Until 2020 or until even last year, UAE, Saudi Arabia were often on the same page as leaders of the Sunni Muslim world. But now a clear division has come up between them, with UAE acting on its own, Qatar punching way above its weight and acting on its own. A clear division in the region among the Sunni powers, which further complicates things for India. Now, we do have an initiative called I2U2 that includes India, Israel, UAE, and United States. So that's an economic partnership. But again, it's a sign that India has been more willing of late to slightly have a closer equation with Israel and United States, which could harm India's interests with the other Arab states and the other countries in West Asia, because Iran would not view this favorably. And even some of the other Arab states and the Sunni Shia powers may not take this lightly from the Indian side. So, how will India navigate the difficult times? And how would we maintain that strategic balance, the multipolarity in our multi alignment that we see in our foreign policy? This is going to be the challenge in the coming days. So, let's wait and watch for further developments. Of course, we need further details. That's why I said let's not speculate. Let's not go into the details of the war itself. That's immaterial for us, right? But what matters for us is the background. What does it mean for the region? What does it mean for India? And how do you justify these actions? How does US, Israel, how are they justifying it? Is it legal? Is it valid? What will Iran do? This is something I think we need to understand. So I hope the session has helped you understand this, and let me know your views and thoughts on this development, right? So I would love to know as to what you think about what's happening today between Israel and Iran and US and Iran. Do you think US, Israel are justified in resorting to this military action? Or do you think Iran's regime should fall? And should it be through a foreign military intervention? And or do you think that this could simply push the region into a spiral, into a much larger crisis which can't be contained? Or are we staring at unprecedented conflict of sorts, something which could decimate the region itself? Let me know what you think in the comments. So that is it. Thanks for watching. Take care.